Welcome to News Matters. I'm Katie Sheehan. In today's evolving and immediate digital world, it's perhaps more important than ever before to be a smart and savvy news consumer. Think about it. News and information comes at you all day, every day, from countless and varied sources. Sources you might not even think of as news providers. According to Pew Research Center, 63% of adults say the internet is their primary news source. And an eMarketer 2013 survey reveals they spend an average of 5 hours online per day. Think of all the ways you can encounter news online in 5 hours. It comes at you from all angles. That same Pew Research found that 8% of adults get news through Twitter in 140 characters or less. 30% turn to Facebook, your news source, and what you know about its connections, funding, methods, and motivations is absolutely critical to your ability to judge information and act accordingly. So, who do you believe? Them? Him? Her? These guys? Him? Him? How about them?
The Constitution isn't the 1900s anymore. We have the way to make
We can't let Big Brother
what's going on.
take over
We
our
have it. Why waste it?
Thanks, guys. Thanks for that. With so many sources and so much information out there, can you believe anyone at all? Where do you start? Let's start with a recent headline out of Ukraine.
This is a Fox News alert. Jewish people in one eastern Ukraine city are reportedly being ordered to register with pro-Russian separatists. Masked men reportedly giving out notices to Jews leaving synagogue on Passover. The flyers telling the Jews to register and pay a special fee or risk being deported and having their property confiscated.
Okay, so Greta has us all on red alert because apparently someone told all the Jews in Ukraine to register with the government. First of all, look at the bottom right corner. Why is there a car on fire? Is that why they want the Jews out, for starting car fires? Is it from a related story? Why is it there? Secondly, was this an isolated incident? Was there one flyer or 100,000? Did it come from the government or from my Uncle Kenny? Surely Greta will get to the bottom of this. Let's watch.
Former UN Ambassador John Bolton joined us. Good evening, sir. And when we saw this news, it just sent shivers up everybody's spine. Your thought?
No, absolutely. Look, we don't know exactly who's responsible. My guess is it's pro-Russian elements, maybe these uniformed militiamen who may well be from Russia itself. But the fact they would put the Jewish question on the table like this shows that there's enormous trouble ahead in Ukraine. Whatever the outcome over the next few days, whatever the outcome of the agreement negotiated in Geneva today, this is far from over. And by introducing this particular form of racial incitement, it's guaranteeing that the temperature is going to continue to rise.
Well, I think probably most Americans feel, it's like never again, when they see something like this. I mean, that does change the dynamics if it turns out to be more than just sort of a rogue group with something that blows over. But, this is such an important issue, to Americans. What should the president say or do or think or what when he hears this?
Well, I think Secretary Kerry has already condemned it, and that's fine, but that's of a piece with the problem with the entire Obama administration policy in Ukraine. It's essentially all rhetoric.
No questions answered and little information shared. Is this news, rumor, or opinion? It took Bolton just over a minute to blame President Obama. But just who is John Bolton? He's a lawyer and a Republican who served for both President Bushes and was once the U.S. permanent representative to the United Nations. He's also a key member of the Gatestone Institute and the Groundswell Group, think tanks and political action groups. According to a scathing report from Mother Jones's David Korn, Groundswell reportedly exists to push scandals and repeal the ACA. So a guy who formed a group specifically to push scandals and make the president look bad is the guy on the news telling us that Obama is to blame for something that may or may not have actually happened. But back to Ukraine, Twitter and Facebook blew up with this news. Major media outlets freaked out. Everyone seemingly reported the same story without bothering to fact-check it. Once news outlets actually took the time to try and validate the pamphlets, doubts regarding their veracity surfaced. When reached for comment, the man whose signature appears on the letter said he didn't write it. Denis Pushilin, the self-described chairman of Donetsk, said it was an isolated incident traced back to, quote, some idiots. The National Director of Anti-Defamation League said his organization was, quote, skeptical about the document's authenticity. Outlets who had reported the story rushed to clean up their mess, reporting after the fact that the incident was likely an insignificant, isolated event. Yes, someone circulated a flyer that said all Jews must register, but it did not come from any government. Just because something looks real, like the flyer, doesn't mean it's valid. And here's why this matters. Major news organizations chose to give this one small action airtime. They turned it into a major news alert, and then they had to retract it. Was it even news? And in the rush to report it quickly, did anyone bother to check information for accuracy? Apparently not. They just ran with it, leaving countless viewers to repeat the story, passing it on as truth to friends and family. This isn't a right or left, black or white, blue or red problem. It happens everywhere. This is retired General Barry McCaffrey on Hardball, where he's billed as an MSNBC military analyst. He's about to tell Chris Matthews whether or not the U.S. should leave Afghanistan. What you don't know is that McCaffrey is also on the board of a defense contractor called DynCorp, a company that just happened to have a large contract in Afghanistan. Without that knowledge, you can't judge the validity of his statements. Democracy Now!, a listener-funded independent news program, says that in a 3-year period starting in 2007, 75 lobbyists, PR reps, or corporate officials appeared on major news networks without proper disclosure. As news consumers, we had no way of knowing whether these news sources were giving objective information or self-serving opinions. Think it's not a big deal? The information we receive, true or false, biased or neutral, informs our entire worldview. Let's go out on the street and see how good most Americans are at playing the modern news game.
Who watches the news? Does everybody kind of pays attention to the news? Yeah, that's impressive. Now, how do you guys get the news? Like, do you watch TV? Do you look at it on social media? Do you... Twitter?
Yeah, a lot of Facebook.
TV and Twitter. I use the app USA Today.
When you wake up in the morning, you check Twitter, you check the news, turn on TV.
CNN, ABC, every so often Fox, but not so much.
I look at Channel 9, Wavy TV 9. Is it Wavy TV 9?
Yeah.
Wavy TV 10?
Yeah.
Well, I watch Channel 9.
Like social media or my parents or somebody talking about it.
Normally through Yahoo or like internet pretty much, and then I watch like the 9 o'clock news.
I'm more like a CNN, anything that say news, 7 News, 5 News, 8 News, anything that say news 2020, anything that educate me and let me know what's going on in my world, I'm there.
If I do watch the news, it's usually like off my iPad, and I'll click on the CNN app or Fox News app.
Times, the Tribune, BBC, whatever.
What are your thoughts on like MSNBC?
I don't know.
Don't know?
Don't know.
Chris Matthews is pretty extreme.
Extreme?
Yeah.
You don't like watching it?
For comical relief, yes, but
CNN used to be some sort of news, and now it's just like the two talking heads, and it has nothing to do with having any objective truth.
I really don't like TMZ too much.
Why not?
Fox News is a money-making machine. I'm not a real big fan of them, but I'm going to say that behind the rhetoric of them, there's something valid. I mean, there's some enthymemes that we have to find as common ground, and I think that's something that's definitely lacking in news now, is that there's positionality, on both sides of the spectrum.
And how do you know what to trust? Like, sometimes there will be false
That's
information.
kind of hard.
A lot of it is opinion-based, so when it's opinion-based, you can't really tell if it's factual or if it's, like I said, more opinion-based. So,
Right.
yeah, it can be kind of stressful.
There's always 3 points of view, kind of what they're saying, what your kind of view is, and what the actual truth of what's happening.
It's hard when I just want to hear the story and not a side, and most news anchors or news networks are very biased in the political sides they're supporting and sharing.
So you think there's kind of a trust issue with news anchors?
Yeah, it's more opinionated. Even if they're sharing the facts, like the infliction and the other comments that come along with it, it's very biased.
It can be really hard to know what's real and what's not. Check out this picture, widely circulated on Facebook and Twitter. The caption tells us it's a Syrian refugee child sleeping between the graves of his dead parents. But it's a hoax. Here's the photo of the smiling kid relaxing between shots. The photo was taken in Saudi Arabia, not Syria. The kid is actually the nephew of photographer Abdul Aziz. Aziz, who first posted the photo on Facebook, says his captions made it clear that the graves were fake. He was trying to show that the love of a child for his parents is irreplaceable. But here's where things get tricky. Weeks later came this AP photo published on many major news outlets. It shows a real scene of thousands of refugees waiting for food. How do we know this second picture is real if we've already been burned by the first? It's time to get some questions answered. We're here with Clark Bell, McCormick Foundation's Journalism Program Director. Thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
So when we watch, read, or listen to the news, how do we know what we should be believing? How do we know what's right?
Well, it's a real challenge, and I think in today's world, information comes at you so quickly. We're bombarded all the time, every second of every day, with news and information, but is it true? Is it reliable? Is it credible? We all need to make these decisions, and to me, one way of doing it is by asking the same question that a journalist asks. The who, what, where, when, why, and how. These are the questions you're trying to answer in your story. Well, the consumer, the citizen needs to look at the information that's presented to them and say, who's telling me this information? Why are they doing it? Where is it coming from? How did they get to the point where I'm supposed to accept what they have to say? So follow that kind of 5 W's and an H. And I think it's a good way of analyzing what is new, what is reliable, what is credible.
We're here with Jerry Kern, the Senior Vice President and Editor here at the Chicago Tribune. Thanks for having us in your office today.
Thank you.
What's the value in getting news from more than one source?
You gain different perspectives. You can see, you can judge over a period of time who's, what source of information perhaps had more detail, more, more support for it. So just different perspective and coordinate points is really important.
I know this one I think can be tricky for a news consumer, trying to figure out what is the difference between news and opinion, because I think some people may listen to the radio and I heard that on the news, or I read that in the paper, and they may not look at the difference between editorial page, an opinion talk show host, that type of thing. How do you tell the difference?
So I think all human beings bring points of view. It's almost impossible not to have points of view based out of your life's experience. I think in journalism there's a rigor, there's a set of professional standards and a way of going about it that balances that ensures as much as possible that it doesn't make it into a news story. It's the belief at its core that we present stories that as closely as possible reflect an objective reality, that present facts, that present alternative points of view. Typically those stories go through an editing process where people are asking questions about that and pushing on those stories, and here it goes through a very rigorous process. So all that I think helps. Also making sure that the institution itself has at its heart a set of principles that values those things. When it comes to opinion, I think it's a very different thing. But it's important that the institution, whether it's the Chicago Tribune or another news organization, makes clear what its principles are, makes clear that there's a set of beliefs that are informing the editorials and the ideas that are being put forward. That's transparency.
What do you think it means to be a good news consumer?
You know, a good news consumer, I think, is someone who feels connected to their community, feels an obligation to citizenship, cares about what happens to the community at large, is invested in understanding about events that are happening around him or her. I think that's an obligation of citizenship, and that will make the effort to be connected and to find out information, to read, to follow the news, to take that information, assess it, be skeptical about it, be open-minded about it, but then to take that information and act upon it in the name of creating a better place to live.
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
What life decisions will news literacy impact?
Oh, I think they could be everything from what college you choose, to where you go to live, to who you vote for. I mean, you can take it through every part of life. But you've got to have the information to make the rational decision. And I think as a news literate person, you have to pick and choose your spots of what you accept, what you follow up on, what you comment on. And it's just part of being an active, engaged citizen today. It's critical thinking skills. But we should all become more civically engaged, have more civic debate, civil debate, and use news and information to learn from each other and build on our own knowledge and become more involved in our society. I think that's what we're looking for here.
In April of 2013, tragedy gripped the nation when bombers targeted the Boston Marathon. But in the rush for ratings in our 24-hour news cycle, news outlets like CNN made costly errors. On Wednesday, 2 days later, they reported an arrest had been made. None had. Then John King used the adjective, quote, dark-skinned to describe an at-large suspect. He named his source as a, quote, law enforcement official. Wrong again. The New York Post led with pictures of 2 innocent men. On-air anchors and reporters discussed the info for about an hour, while other news outlets, such as the Associated Press, Fox News, and the Boston Globe, all released false information. Scrambling reporters, hosts, and correspondents were widely panned for looking and sounding caught off guard. But why is the rush to outscoop everyone else so tempting? CNN, led by new president Jeff Zucker, chose to stick with around-the-clock coverage that, despite the network's struggles, struck ratings gold with a jump of 194%. Higher ratings, of course, turns into more advertising revenue, which is tied to profits, which are tied to satisfying stockholders and investors. 11 months later, when Flight 370 disappeared without a trace, the network, with its Boston ratings spike in mind, again turned to a speculative 24/7 approach while forsaking more significant stories like the Russian invasion of Crimea, Obama's steps to reform the NSA, or violent protests in Venezuela. And don't think this is just a TV problem. All news vehicles must be scrutinized. In 1980, Janet Cook published a heart-wrenching story of an underage drug addict. Her account in the Washington Post, Jimmy's World, won her a Pulitzer Prize and a $1.6 million movie deal. The story was fake, created under pressure to, quote, satisfy editors. Stephen Glass became an associate editor at the New Republic and wrote dozens of articles for various magazines from 1995 to 1998. The problem? He made up his own facts. 27 out of 41 stories he wrote for the New Republic were either partially or totally fabricated. Glass, who earned 6 figures in the late 90s, later told CBS that he lied to make every story, quote, perfect, a, quote, home run. James Fry published his memoir, A Million Little Pieces, in 2003. It became a New York Times bestseller and an Oprah's book club title. Guess what? Also fake. When confronted, Fry claimed he added false information for, quote, literary effect. In January of 2012, NPR broadcast one of its most popular episodes of This American Life, an hour-long public radio program hosted by Ira Glass. In Mr. Daisy Goes to the Apple Factory, Mike Daisy revealed the shocking conditions in Apple Incorporated's Chinese manufacturing facility. Just 2 months later, NPR retracted the story, denouncing it as fake and full of errors. Daisy, they said, misled producers during the fact-checking process. That led to this exchange on Second Broadcast.
So you lied about that. That wasn't what you saw.
I wouldn't express it that way.
How would you express it?
I would say that I wanted to tell a story that captured the totality of my trip. I'm not going to say that I didn't take a few shortcuts in my passion to be heard, but I stand behind the work. My mistake, the mistake I truly regret, is that I had it on your show as journalism, and it's not journalism. It's theater. It uses the tools of theater and memoir to achieve its dramatic arc. And of that arc and that work, I'm very proud because I think it made you care.
Then Ira Glass asks him if this version is true.
But I don't know that I would say in a theatrical context that it isn't true. But I believe that when I perform it in a theatrical context in the theater, that when people hear the story in those terms, that we have different languages for what the truth means.
I understand that you believe that, but I think you're kidding yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just need a minute. I just got an alert on my phone that a very well-known Hollywood actor has died.
It's not true. It's a hoax.
Really? Well, that's a relief. He is one of my favorites. But you never know with these things. In 2010, Twitter user Original C. Jizzle tweeted this to his 1,500 followers. He retweeted at CNN. Breaking news, actor Morgan Freeman has passed away in his Burbank home. Wow, legendary actor. Hashtag RIP Morgan Freeman. But CNN never tweeted it to be retweeted. It was a Twitter tweet retweet feat. And since everyone can just press retweet without checking it out, the rumor was accepted and in fact spread like wildfire. Thankfully, Freeman's publicist Stan Rosenfield stepped in to remind us all that Freeman was at the time, quote, very much alive. Well, don't worry about me, though. I'm still dressed appropriately. In some ways, journalism, as we know it, is dead and gone. But you know something? I don't think we should accept that. It doesn't have to be. Sure, it's a fast-paced, crazy world out there, and sometimes it might feel like the truth is harder than ever to determine. But that just means it's up to you and me. We have an important role to play. We need to broaden our news consumption, examine our own biases, use critical thinking, and judge the reliability of all we see and hear. Because if we are better news consumers, if we're better informed, then a lot can change. News literacy is critical to our democracy. Did you ever think about how important this little thing is? This is how you decide what you watch, what you hear, and what you accept. Garbage in, garbage out, right? What you watch matters. What you read matters. News matters. Thanks for watching.
I don't think there's like a complete one way to get like all sort of like sides of the news. Like you have to check like multiple sources and like different viewpoints because I mean bias is pretty big in America and almost everything is bias.
If they're just getting that one source, then they're just getting one specific view of that. And if that's all they want, then that's okay. But then they cannot talk and have a legitimate argument for that conflict or that issue.
Once you compare enough sources and you find a main point that's repeated in a lot of them, then you can kind of trust that, but you can't just go with one news station or newspaper or news source all the time.